I'm Allie J here for One Shot. It's great to be back with you. I know it's been a few weeks. I hope you're doing well. I hope things have been going well. And the weather is changing out there. It is getting colder. And I know this is going to be a little controversial, but I'm looking forward to snow. You can be upset with me if you like, but that's just me personally. I know there's a lot of people who think differently about snow. So today on One Shot, I am going to share with you a little bit about my nephew, Case. Now, Case is an interesting child. He has a complex medical history, and you'll hear a little bit more about that in just a little bit from my sister. Case was born with hypoplastic left heart syndrome. I'm not going to go into too much detail talking about that. My sister will give you a little more information as she tells some of his story. So the reason I'm talking about this is because I was in Indiana a couple weeks ago visiting my sister and her 3 boys, as you can see on the screen. So I decided to fly out there and visit for a week, about a week. And so that was a lot of fun. And we had the opportunity to go to an Indy Fuel game. And for those of you who are not familiar with Indy Fuel, that is an ice hockey team. And I believe, if I remember correctly, they are a minor league team to the Chicago Blackhawks. And so this is the Indy Fuel logo. This is the hat that I got while I was out there. So that was so much fun. I had never been to an official ice hockey game before, and that was so much fun to go to. And as you probably remember, I am a big bowler. And so we did a lot of bowling while we were out. Well, not a lot, but we went bowling twice while I was out there. And so we had a lot of fun doing that, getting to bowl with the boys and my sister, and just getting to spend some time with her family and my brother-in-law. It was a lot of fun. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you here to my sister. Her name is Laura. And she is just a little bit older than me, but she has 3 boys, as I mentioned before, and she's going to tell you a little bit about Case's situation and his medical history.
When Case was born, he was born a healthy, almost 9-pound baby. He was chunky, healthy, happy. We enjoyed about 30 hours with him until we noticed something was wrong. And he started going into respiratory distress. At first, we didn't think there was anything too major, just something that maybe he would need a little bit of support and maybe a little bit of NICU time. So we transferred him to a local hospital. It was super scary, but we still didn't really realize how bad it was yet. When they came to transfer him to the first hospital, they realized how quickly he was declining and they needed to intubate him very quickly. Thankfully, they had a very specialized person that was able to intubate a tiny baby very quickly. It was very scary saying goodbye to him, because we didn't really realize at that point what it was. So as soon as we got to the first hospital, we got to meet with the doctor. They instantly knew what it was with the first scan, and they said, he can't stay here. We only have one hospital in Indiana that can take care of him. So by that time, they had somewhat stabilized him, so they got the lifeline ready, and he was airlifted to Riley Hospital. Once we made it to the Children's Hospital, we got to see him for the first time, and he was finally stable, but still very critical. The doctor sat down with us within hours of us just being there and told us the grave news of his condition, that he had hypoplastic left heart syndrome. What that meant was that his left side of his heart didn't develop at all. He had literally no function of that left side of his heart, and he was in need of surgery very quickly. But not only that, he was going to need a series of 3 surgeries over the course of his life. And even after those 3 surgeries, he would still not have a cure, and he would eventually need a transplant. All this was so foreign and unknown to us, and we just had to take it in so quickly and know that within a week's time, he would be taken into surgery to have open heart surgery. Case was able to have his surgery at 9 days old, and he had a really rough time with that. He almost got put on ECMO, which I'll explain that later, but he really struggled for the first couple weeks after that, and then he bounced back, but he had a hard time feeding. He wouldn't tolerate foods. because his oxygen levels were just in such a bad place. His tummy was just in a very bad place, and so we couldn't feed him very well, so that took a long time for us to finally be able to come home. After Case's first surgery, we finally were able to attempt to feed him for the first time, and he was almost 2 months old. He wouldn't take a bottle. We finally got him to take a passy. He wouldn't take a bottle. Eventually, we started being able to feed him, and such joy it was when we were able to feed him like an ounce. But he still was struggling. They did a swallow study. They were worried about aspiration, and they said this is going to take a lot of work and a lot of time, and we don't even know if it's safe, so we need to place a G-tube. So about the time he was maybe a month and a half old, he had another surgery and just had a little tiny G-tube placed in his belly so that we could feed him. So we finally came home, and we struggled every night. I would feed him and he would vomit. I would feed him and he would get sick. And he needed it to grow, but he couldn't tolerate it. But yet they said, you're doing a great job. He's still growing. Just keep feeding him. But that was a very stressful point in life because you're a mom and you're supposed to feed your kid. But every time I would feed him, he would cry and he would get sick, and he would cry and he would get sick, and he couldn't hardly sleep a half an hour at a time. And every time I would feed him, he would cry for an hour, and then finally he would get a half an hour's sleep, and then he would just fuss the whole night through, and I would sleep through his room. So we had him at home. It was great to have him home, but it was really hard. It was just a lot of work. I had a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old at the time. I was having all the sleepless nights. I was worried and stressed because this kid was very sick and crying, and all we were trying to do was get him to be old enough to have his second surgery at 6 to 9 months old. So as he was growing, we had multiple hospitalizations. We had a G-tube incident. We had a sepsis incident where he got some sort of infection. We still don't know what it was to this day. And he ended up having to have IOs, and if that's something you want to look up, that's because he was getting very critical. He also then went into heart failure, which is very common with kids like him, because that right side of his heart is doing all the work, and it's very common for that to get very tired and not be able to sustain you. So on the last hospitalization as of his infancy, when he was 4 months old, he went in, like I said, for heart failure, and he was not tolerating feeds worse than ever, which is why we initially took him in. And then we realized that his heart was failing. They said there was nothing that we could do for that. They also said, well, he's getting close enough to being old enough to have his second surgery. Another one of Case's complications was blood clots, and he had clotted some major veins up here in his chest that would be needed for his second and his third surgery. So they said that he was not eligible for the second surgery. So we had no more options for Case. We ended up putting him on hospice for 6 months, but miraculously after 6 months, he started getting much better. So we put him on the transplant list because we said, what else do we do with this kid? We really wanted options for him. So we put him on the transplant list. We waited at home for 9 months. We never got a call in that time. But he was growing, he was thriving. Now, don't get me wrong, he was still very sick. He still had very low oxygen levels. His oxygen levels were dropping more and more during that time. And by the time he turned 2, his oxygen levels were dipping down into the 60s. And at that point, they were normally wanting them to be in the 70s to the 80s. He was typically 70s. So 60s was, I think, some of our lowest point at home. After 9 months of waiting on the transplant list and not receiving a call, Case finally turned 2 years old, and the doctor said, we have a surgery option. So the risky surgery was actually the second and third surgeries combined as one, which was very risky. So we went ahead and did it just days after his second birthday. He ended up coming out on ECMO, which is a machine that takes the blood out of your body. It deoxygenates it in a machine and then reoxygenates it and puts it right back in. It gives the lungs and the heart a rest. So he was only on that for a couple days, and then
He made a miraculous recovery and turnaround and was able to be discharged just 2 weeks later. Ever since he had that surgery, he had way more energy, he had better oxygen levels, and he started having an appetite and was finally able to learn how to eat. He learned to walk when he was 2, and he learned to start chewing and eating when he was 2. Just come say hi. Just say, hi, my name is Case, and I like Dude Perfect. He just turned 7 years old, and he is a rambunctious, energetic 7-year-old. He loves keeping up with his brothers. He loves running and playing outside. He loves roughhousing. He still has the G-tube. We are working on that. He eats maybe sometimes 40% of his intake, just depending on the day. He still only has, at best, oxygen levels in the upper 80s. That is the best that we are going to get for him at this point without a transplant. And we're just making the best of it that we can. He still occasionally gets sick, but it's way better since he had his surgery at 2 years old.
I got my shoes.
My nephew Case and I, we share a lot of similarities when it comes to personality and different things like that. But we also share one thing in common, that we have both had our fair share of hospital visits and hospital stays. And so that is one thing that I am able to relate with him on when it comes to just knowing the things that he has gone through. I don't have the same medical issues that he has, but when you're going through medical trials and issues, you can kind of relate to people who are also dealing with similar issues. So I hope you've enjoyed getting to learn a little bit more about Case's condition and his medical history. But I also just wanted to be able to make people aware of this situation. Now, not every case is the same. No pun intended for Case's name, but no case is the same in the sense that not every child has the same situation. It's not always standard procedure for every situation. Just like Case's situation was a little bit different than, say, some other child that is born with the condition. Another reason why I wanted to make this video was because I wanted to help make people aware of Case's situation, people who have questions. I know I've shared a lot of Case's history over the years, from when he was a baby, or from when he was born, when he was a baby, and just even in recent years. And so I was hoping that this video might answer some questions about Case's situation and his current health. And that way, it can also be an informative video to let people know about this situation and this medical condition. So that way, if you have any questions, feel free to ask, and we'll do our best to answer these questions. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of One Shot. I'm Allie J. It has been great to be here with you once again. There's going to be more videos coming up soon, and I've got more guests lined up. If you would like to be a guest here on One Shot, please feel free to shoot me a message right on Facebook, One Shot Podcast, or leave a comment down below on this video. And just let me know if there's a specific topic that you would like to hear talked about, maybe discussed, or if there's something that you're interested in discussing on One Shot. I'd be glad to have you here on the show. Thanks a lot for watching. I'm Allie J. Have a great week, and see you next time.